And I've been actually working on this topic for a long time. Actually, 3 or 4 weeks. I just never had the time to really finally do it. And now it's basically the working conditions in China, specifically have to do with Apple, and it really applies to a lot of other companies, not just Apple. Now, there was like a New York Times news article that kind of got the ball rolling, and it's really nothing new because, like I said, give an example, Foxconn. It's really Foxconn and Apple. Their working conditions supposedly by these news articles are very bad, and along those lines. And you got to remind yourself, Foxconn really supplies 1/3 to 2/3 of all electronic companies, not just Apple. Computers, Hewlett-Packard, phones, Samsung, the list goes on and on. Television sets. Not only that, I mean, you got to look at the garment industry. Most of the clothes you're probably wearing right now actually probably made in a third world country, where the working conditions and wages are not just good, or not that great. So you got to keep that in mind too. So I'm going to kind of go over the list, some of the reasons, why Apple kind of moved their manufacturing overseas. And it could apply to a lot of companies, not just Apple, specifically Foxconn. Obviously, cheap labor is a very good reason. And now, there's also been a few other articles, and I think one of them was called "How the U.S. Lost Out on the iPhone," meaning how come the manufacturing of the iPhone wasn't kept in the United States. And there's several reasons. Obviously, cheap labor was one of them, but it was actually due to other reasons, probably even more important. The lack of qualified engineers to be able to run the factories if they built them here in America. And Apple even did a survey before they even considered doing this, because the demand for the iPhone was starting to get too great for them to put out sufficient quantities. So they had a third party do a survey, and they found out that it would take them 9 months to find enough qualified engineers to supply the factories here in America. And they did the same survey in China. They found out only take 5 days. And it's just simply because China is a bigger industrial manufacturing country than we are right now, when what we used to be like 50 to 100 years ago. China has this scalability, flexibility, and the manpower that we don't have as well. And flexibility is able to, like Foxconn actually's got empty warehouses where if a company wants to build something, they just pull in their equipment. They already have the workers, the engineers, and they can actually start pumping out product very soon. Unlike here in America, we don't have the scale to do that. Obviously, the manpower as well, because Foxconn employs 1 million employees for manufacturing of all their devices for their clients. Another big one is Asian supply chains, because most of the supply chains for parts they need to make these devices are located in China or in the proximity of the places where they make the products. And even like at the last minute, if they need to make a modification for perhaps a new model coming out, they can do it often within, or even a single part change, they can do it within hours. Vice, it may take days or weeks if we're here in America. So let me see what else we got here. Okay, now this was actually off of This American Life website, and it was basically interviewed with Mike Daisey, which is a journalist and author, and he actually went to China to talk to the workers in Foxconn, and he wasn't allowed inside the factory, but he talked to the workers as they exited for their shift change. And actually, there was some problems, which was actually quite noted, and it was actually I think it was an hour-long audio podcast that I listened to. But strangely enough, when I listened to the toward the end of it, there was actually a group of 3 people talking about the whole situation together, because initially it was just the Mike Daisy doing most of the audio commentary. And there actually there's this one guy commenting on the large turnover rate of employees every month. Basically meaning they'd be quitting and then they have to rehire new workers. And then the question was asked, what can be done by name manufacturers to improve working conditions? And this is one of the reply of one of them, what they said. In reality, a better way that is proven to be more effective is workers speaking with their feet. And what he meant by this was, if they're not happy with the situation at factories, they can leave, because there's other factories that they can work for. And he said this has a better effect on better wages, working conditions, and dormitories, making it more attractive for the employees. And, you know, I hear a lot about, now I do admit most of the Chinese factories, well, in China, actually do have poor working conditions, safety violations, a lot of things that are very bad. Now, I think Foxconn is one of the exceptions. They still have their problems, though. I do admit that. And, but, you know, I'm going to look at some of the working conditions here in America. And I'm going to actually start with my own experiences. If you guys may or may not know this, I was actually retired from the Navy about 4 years ago. And so I'm going to give you my experiences of some of the work conditions I had to work with. But actually, let me go a little bit into Foxconn, some of their working conditions. They work an average of 6 days a week, at least 12 hours a day, and very often overtime. Now, they do get amenities like they get their own dormitories to live in. They get free food to eat. And I think that even extends out to more. I'm not saying, I don't know if it's free medical or dental and other things thrown in perhaps. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you some of the working conditions I have. Now, probably half of my military career was 20 years. At least half of that was spent on ships underway at sea on deployment. And when we're on ships, we worked about 6 days a week. Sunday was off, free time. But usually you had watch, so you ended up working at least 5 hours that day. And now, if you had watch, half the time, even after your 8-hour workday, then you got to add 5 hours of watch on top of that. So you could actually be working as long as 13 hours or even more. Some even have longer watches, 6 hours. So, and if you have any equipment breaking, you got to take care of it. So that means your working hours are even extended even longer. And we often had to work in extreme heat and cold. Give an example, I was an engineer, and I often had to work in engineering spaces where you have all the equipment running, boilers and anything. A lot of things down there produce heat. So during the summer times, temperatures average around 90 to 120 degrees with no air conditioning. You would have some ventilation fans, which would help, but not that much. Now, if it got to a certain point, they would have, it's called, they would limit your stay time. You would only stay down there maybe 4 or 5 hours at a time. That was during, you know, I'm guessing about 120 degrees or some around. They'd actually do heat surveys every day. Now, There's some people even work outside the ship underway, and during the winter months, you could be working as temperatures as low as 35 degrees below zero in the wind chill factor. And then some of the watches would have to go out for 4 to 6 hours at a time, and they would have to wear what we call pumpkin suits, which are basically survival suits because it'd be so cold in some instances. And another thing was kind of mentioned also was the dormitories they lived in. They were stuck in a small room with 20 people per room, and I kind of can relate that as well because if you go some of the berthing places, which is where we lived, you would often have 60 people to a berthing compartment. Now it's obviously bigger, but we would all fit in these little cubicles. Now the cubicles would fit 6 men, 3 on each side, and each side would be stacked 3 high. And it was kind of a narrow, wasn't very big. So in the morning, you have 6 guys in a little tiny cubicle getting ready for muster in the morning. That's not much room. And the racks were definitely, or racks meaning beds, were actually smaller than what you find, or much smaller than what you would find at Foxconn. And in fact, they even call them coffin lockers because what you slept on was actually a locker you lifted up to put all your stuff in underneath. So, and if you live on a sub, and since space was limited, you would actually have to share a bed with somebody else. Not at the same time, but you would actually have to rotate it out. While somebody's on watch or working, the other person would be sleeping in the bed, and then obviously you would shift change, and that guy would sleep in the same bed. So as you could see, that was a very fun type of situation. So it's not just, it's not just working conditions in China. It's many places, even in places that have better economies like America. And I don't even consider it poor working living conditions. It's just that's the type of environment we had to work and live in, and that's what we just had to get used to. So, keep that in mind. Keep things in perspective when we're talking about China and some of the things over there, because there's other jobs here in America or Europe or whatever that, especially some high risk ones, that doesn't have the best working conditions or whatever. So I think that's important to keep in mind.